My name is Kishana Peck. I'm the CEO of Toronto WomenX in Data Science. And we have put this special session together with 81cents to help you feel more confident negotiating your next offer. So this is a very important segment for me to be able to provide to this community. So I'm really excited for you all to attend. If you have your notebooks out, you can take notes, of course, but the recording of this is going to be provided after as well. So no need to worry if you don't get everything down. Like you can rewatch it. So Annie Murray is who is going to be providing this workshop for us. Annie Murray is a lead negotiator here at Aurora and has been negotiating professionally for almost 2 years. So prior to this, she was a recruiter at Amazon for their loss prevention positions within fulfillment centers. And she also was a recruiter at Microsoft in the university recruiting department. In her time as a negotiator, she has helped people get millions of dollars in increased offers, working with all job titles from project management to commercial counsel to visual artists. From FANG to small startups and from the Bay Area to Singapore, she's helped empower hundreds of talented folks to advocate for themselves. And Aurora has a mission to help underrepresented professionals find the confidence to negotiate. So can we please give a warm welcome to Annie as I welcome her to the stage. I want to see some money bags. We put them there for a reason because you need to be in that mindset for this type of conversation. So I'll bring Annie up. Yes, perfect. This is what I like to see. So I'm bringing Annie up to the stage now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm thrilled to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. So there's more people coming in, but the stage is all yours.
Awesome. Well, let me go ahead and share my screen really quickly. And I just wanted to say thank you all so much for having me. It is such an honor and a privilege to get to speak for the Women in Data Science team here at Toronto. You know, I'm actually going to be visiting Toronto with the Aurora team next week. And personally, I've never been, so I'm very excited. I'm actually based out of Seattle. But yes, very excited to go to Toronto. And, one of my passions about, doing negotiation is helping women like yourselves, take money from these billionaires and put it back in your pocket. Right. So whatever I can do to facilitate that, that's my goal. But yeah, I just want to welcome everyone in. I know that we have a couple of stragglers probably coming in a little bit late. But as Kishana said earlier, this will be recorded. So no worries if you've missed the first little bit, not a problem. As Kishana said, I am a lead negotiator at Aurora. I've done thousands of offer negotiations, helped a lot of folks get a lot more money. And before this, I was a recruiter at Microsoft's university recruiting department. And that's actually how I kind of got into recruiting. And while I was there, I helped lead interviews for their prestigious Explore internship, which is basically an internship that is for folks who've never had an internship before. So it was pretty great. Got to meet people from all over the world. And then I was a recruiter at Amazon, helping them get loss prevention folks into their fulfillment centers. Kind of got to see what that experience was like. And I know what you're thinking. Negotiating in this economy, is this even possible? Now more than ever, should you do your best to negotiate? Because ultimately, this is a time of, financial stress for a lot of us, right? So you want to secure your income that will keep you and your family comfortable and afloat during this time. Right. And it's important to set clear and firm boundaries, especially about, things that really matter to you, work-life balance, projects that you're really passionate about. Ultimately, we only have so much time, right, on this planet. So you want to make sure that you're doing all you can to get as much fulfillment and growth out of your job as possible. And I know that a lot of these companies want you to think that you don't have power here, but you definitely still do. And there's definitely, a lot of scary things in the news right now. You open up the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, you're going to see things that are frightening about, Google, Meta, Twitter, Nvidia, Amazon, Apple, all on hiring freeze, right? So it can seem like, is it even worth it to try to transition jobs right now? Is it even going to pan out in anything successful? And I'll tell you this, I am still seeing people come in, trickles in of Google offers, Amazon offers, Twitter offers. it's still happening. It is more of an uphill battle in terms of negotiating, especially with Amazon, than it used to be. Amazon used to willingly give out top of band offers, even above top of salary band offers pretty regularly. Now the internal culture is such that they don't want to give out even top of band offers. But that's not to say that it's not still possible. Definitely like Google, Meta, Twitter, Nvidia. It's just going to be about, once the hiring actually kicks off. And there's a ton of other great companies out there that are still increasing compensation, that are still hiring actively. So I'd really guide you, if you're on the first step of your job search process, look away from FANG. Look at the tier 2 tech companies. Look at Lyft, Uber, Instacart, DoorDash, companies that are still hiring actively and that will still pay you a competitive amount. So it's definitely still possible. But ultimately, why does this matter to you? What does it mean for you? And, I'm so passionate about helping people realize why it's important to negotiate. Because at the end of the day, if you don't negotiate, it's really costing you long term. It's not even just about getting yourself a cash payout tomorrow. It's about setting yourself up for success. That way, when you get promoted in the future, you get raises in the future, your compensation will be going in the right direction. Because if you come in with an offer that hasn't moved at all, that's like a bottom of the band offer, all your promotions and raises, any adjustment to your compensation is based on that. So, let's say you accept an offer that's, and I'm just pulling out numbers out of thin air here. Let's say it's like 150K yearly comp, but the range has the potential where you could negotiate up to 250K comp. If you don't choose to negotiate, if you decide to keep it at 150K, you're never going to be equal to the same as what your colleagues might be making with that higher amount, right? And also, it's just important to really get a sense of how much these companies value you, how much their values align with your own. Because if you try to make an ask about compensation to a company and you do it respectfully and, coming from a place of solid justification of, look, here's my competing offers and the ask that you're making is not too high, and the company responds really, really negatively to that, is that really the company that you want to work for? That can really give you that insight into how much these companies are really valuing you. And I worked with a client, ES, and they were negotiating with 2 different companies, and they were really excited about Stripe. But, Stripe hadn't really moved on compensation, and we tried a few times. And then all of a sudden, their other opportunity at Plaid, that recruiter at Plaid just increased the offer by 100K yearly comp just because they really wanted this client to join without this client even having pushed back, right? So you really get a chance to see these companies literally put their money where their mouth is, right? And show by demonstrating with this action of giving you more money, how much they really want you to join. And it can feel like an uphill battle right now, because there is a purposeful information disparity that is set by these companies. When you go into this negotiation, if you don't have anybody, that you've paid to, help support you, any coach like that, if you're going in by yourself, your only resources are like friends, family, colleagues, and maybe some online data points. And, as much as we love our friends and colleagues, anecdotal evidence only gets you so far, and online data points are not very easily verified, right? And the company, on the other hand, they have up-to-date compensation market analysts who are literally looking at every market data trend every single day, what the stock market is looking like. You've got recruiters who are trained negotiators. When I was at Microsoft, the people who did the negotiation, those were called the closer recruiters. And I remember walking past a group of closer recruiters being told by their manager, these people are trained to reject the first offer. They will reject the first offer. Your action item from there is this, right? They're very purposefully trained to negotiate, right? And then you've got the hiring committee who's making the decision if you should even get hired, and they see what the compensation is across the entire company. And you've got the hiring manager too, is thinking about the budget for the team. And there's just a lot of information that you don't have, right? But that's why Rora exists. That's why companies like Rora exist, right? We want to close that information disparity gap, right? And the best that you can do if you're going solo is try to look at multiple online databases. A lot of people will go to just levels.fyi, see a couple of data points, call it good. that's not really sufficient. You want to be looking as much of a shotgun approach, especially when you're just looking online, because there's going to be a ton of data points there. And it is going to be kind of hard to verify which ones are accurate and which ones aren't. So the more that you get, the more, of sort of a scatter plot, you can see that correlation there. Right. And I would also say, too, if you're looking for a promotion or a raise at your current company, I know company cultures and such, they try to guide you away from talking about money with your colleagues. I'd actually really guide you the opposite. Talk about how much you're making with your colleagues. It's really in your best interest to do that, because again, going back to that example of, if you start making 150K, your colleague makes 250K, you'll never know how off your compensation is if you don't have those conversations. And there's a reason your bosses don't want you to engage with that, because it's not in their best interest, right? It's in your best interest. So definitely would recommend, don't be afraid to go to a colleague, a mentor at your current company and just ask them, what comp could I expect for this promotion or raise? And I know what you're thinking, in a lot of these instances, your boss, your manager, your recruiter, they're telling you, oh, don't worry, we're a family here. We're going to take care of you. Why should I push for more compensation now? When companies say we're a big family here, that's really just an excuse for them to not treat you the best, right? That's kind of an excuse for them to, kind of jerk you around and then, oh, well, we're a family here, so you can't really push back on it, right? But does a family lay you off? Does a family, do a performance evaluation for you annually? It's, that's not what it is, right? And as we talked about before, if you don't negotiate now, it's really going to hurt you in the long run. And, I think it just really helps give you a good insight into how much these companies are valuing you when you make a push. Because if you make an ask and the company responds really negatively, maybe that's indicative that they have another candidate in the pipeline who's not pushing as hard. Maybe, if they're really willing to give you more comp, maybe that means that you're a higher value add than you expect, right? And, to use an example, we had a client who was a DeepMind researcher. She elected to not negotiate, and she got an equity package, just equity, of $340,000. Now, her colleagues were getting equity as high as $1 million over 4 years, right? So that's a huge disparity, $700,000 of disparity. Right. And this was a great researcher. She did her paper, her first authorized paper with oral spotlights at NIPS. That's a big deal. And the manager tried to acknowledge that by giving her a 20% raise on the base salary. But even with that, equity refreshers at this company were only $75K annually. Right. So even if she worked for another 4 or 5 years at this company, she would never be made whole to get to that 1 million equity amount. And because of this, DeepMind ended up losing a great researcher, right? Because she didn't end up negotiating and pushing to get that comp that she deserved. So at the end of the day, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So, the value that you create for whatever company you work for, it's never going to be close to the value extract in the form of compensation. It's just not. What you're bringing to the table for 40 hours a week, it's really hard to correlate that into a dollar amount, right? So while your impact at the time, your impact at this company will grow exponentially over time, your compensation doesn't. Your compensation just grows linearly. And ultimately, that's why a lot of the time people will encourage you, if you're trying to make gains in your compensation, change jobs every year, right? So people will leave their company to get a meaningful compensation change, but that doesn't always mean that you're getting a meaningful career change. It doesn't always mean that you're moving up the ladder in terms of responsibilities, because if you're not getting that time to stay there and really learn and grow in your time at that company, you're not really getting that same career growth. Now, of course, there are some situations when you shouldn't negotiate, or you should be very, very mindful of how to negotiate, and I would say that could really come down to when you're interacting with your manager, what signals are you getting from them? Are they signaling to you that they're really excited about you, that you're going to be a high value add? Are they more signaling that there's a bit of apathy around you as a candidate? Are they, not really seeming too interested or excited to chat with you about the scope of your role, about long-term growth? In that instance, it might not be the best fit. And it also, if the manager really doesn't want anything to do to support you, or, if you try to negotiate and they completely shut you down, it sounds like social capital is pretty limited in that instance, and the increases will be a little bit more minimal. So, tread lightly there. You don't want to risk the relationship with a manager too much. But I would also say there are some situations when you're only negotiating with HR, when you don't have that manager contact. That could be a situation like Meta, for example. A lot of times they hire folks, and you get hired, you do your offer negotiation, and then after that, then you do your team matching to, potentially find a hiring manager. So in that instance, it can be hard because you don't have that hiring manager on the inside advocating for you, and be careful, listen to what the recruiter is saying. If they're telling you, team equity is at the forefront, we want to make sure everybody's getting paid the same with a set band, that really can make it more of an uphill battle. But I think the most common fear that I get, especially from women, is, I don't want to look greedy. And, I think that ultimately we have to kind of move away from this, greedy sort of mentality, because it's not about you wanting this compensation because you've got dollar signs in your eyes. It's more about you want compensation that's going to support you and your family through an economic downturn. You want compensation that makes sense for you in your career. So don't think of it so much as you going to your recruiter and saying, give me $700K or I'm leaving. That's not what we recommend. Think about it more as you're outlining your situation. I've got this opportunity at TikTok, and, based on what I can realistically afford, if you guys were able to get to a yearly comp of $500K, that would be, enough for me to feel motivated to sign, right? Think about making it more about outlining your situation and asking the recruiter for help in that situation than you going in and, bursting down the door and demanding compensation. And I'll also say that in the business world, in the tech world, you should know how to negotiate, right? Most managers and recruiters expect you to do so. I actually have a colleague, she's a recruiter at Plaid, and she tells me that oftentimes women will come in and just accept the first offer, and she is the recruiter in her head is saying, no, come on, negotiate. But obviously she can't say that, right? But it can be almost a red flag if you don't negotiate, right? And it's, of course, going to feel awkward, but don't let that stop you from pushing, because they're used to it. These recruiters, they do it all day, every day. Now, we've talked a lot about why it's important to negotiate, but, how should you start even, taking these steps in this process, right? Now, talking about interviews and whatnot, when I say post loop, I mean like after the on-site interviews, after your final round, I think a lot of times people expect that's the only time when the compensation conversations are really going to kick in. That's not true. Actually, a lot of these companies can ask you what your desired comp is on the job application. And, or they'll be talking to you in the first round phone screen and say, hey, by the way, what comp are you looking for? They want your guard to be down. So that way you call out, 120K. They want you to share a low number, so then they can hold you to that later, once you have a better idea of your market value. So before you even start interviewing, really try to do your research of, does this company even allow negotiations? If you're talking to Coinbase, they don't, right? So make sure you're doing that online research. Look on resources like Team Blind. A lot of times those forums will have that specific information outlined because people post their anecdotes of their time negotiating. Right? They'll let you know, for example, Google, they'll demand that you provide proof of your competing opportunities in writing. So you have to be aware of, how am I going to leverage that? How am I going to mitigate that? And try to get a rough sense of the pay range as well. But don't be too married to that pay range. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And ideally, if you want to set yourself up for success, look for companies that pay 1-to-1 with this opportunity and are a similar, size and a similar stage in their development. You don't want to use a Meta offer as leverage with your, startup opportunity, because the startup will never be able to match Meta. And obviously, with all these companies on hiring freeze, it's a lot harder to use them successfully as leverage. So I'd avoid kind of trying to target those companies just for now. Now, again, your goal is to get offers in similar leagues. You want, Fang Manga versus Fang Manga, right? You want a Series A startup versus a Series A startup. You want a quantitative finance versus quantitative finance, right? And that's mostly because a lot of these companies have different compensation structures. For example, a startup, they don't offer RSUs, they offer stock options, and those get valued in a different way, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. So you ideally want to have another startup that you can also say, okay, here's how they're valuing their equity, just because it's easier for them to compete. And then again, if you're going into an Apple offer and you try to bring your Series A startup, it's going to be too low to really be competitive with Apple. And then quantitative finance, they do all cash compensation, right? No equity. And, then if you try to bring that to Meta or Google, they're just going to say, oh, well, we offer you equity, so you've got potential for long-term growth, right? So ultimately, it can feel, oh, can I only really negotiate with 2 offers? No, you can negotiate with fewer than that. You don't need to have offers in hand from all of these companies to, get increases. In fact, a lot of the time, all you really need is an offer in hand and maybe another opportunity in limbo. And it's just about, creatively framing your leverage opportunities. So when you have less leverage, just think about what information are you sharing with the recruiter? Is it genuine? Is it honest? Think about, if you apply for another company while you've got an offer from, let's say you've got an offer from Meta and you apply for Netflix, you can always tell Meta, well, I'm in consideration for a position at Netflix. I love that phrase, in consideration. It could really mean anything. It could mean that you've got an offer in hand. It could mean that you're partway through your interviews. It could mean that you've applied, right? And it's pretty fair to say, oh, I'm in consideration when you've applied and I'm expecting X compensation. You can expect any compensation, right? But again, it's just about creatively framing it to make it look more flattering to your situation. Now, once you finish your on-site, your final round interviews, obviously, kind of what I was saying earlier, information is the currency in this negotiation. Your recruiter wants to know, what companies are you talking to? What data points have you discussed with those companies? Which company is your top choice? And we want to know, how much do you guys really want me to come here? What's the actual top of band? And are there other candidates in the pipeline? Right? So when we're doing a negotiation, you have to think about giving those information pieces just as like, I'll give you this, you give me this. You give me the first offer, I'll tell you what companies I'm negotiating or I'm talking to, right? So, and how you're framing that leverage in the most flattering light. Do you want to say, oh, I've applied for Apple, or do you want to say I'm in consideration for Apple, right? And recruiters, ideally, they want you to share as much information as possible before they give you an offer. So they'll ask you for your desired compensation and whatnot. And your goal is to push the company to share that information first. And, I think for a lot of people, it can almost feel like gambling. It almost feels a little bit seedy, and that's because the companies are the house. They have the odds stacked in their favor. And I know we kind of talked, I've been throwing around these terms like stock options and equity and whatnot. And let's zoom out for a second. Like, how does this equity component actually work, right? Because most of the time when you get an offer from these companies, they'll give you an offer broken down into a base salary, which is a cash amount, an annual bonus, which is usually a percentage that gets taken from your base salary. That's like, they'll offer you 15% annual bonus. That 15% is 15% of your base salary that you're eligible to get as an annual bonus. And then they'll often offer you an equity grant. Now, if you're at a public company, typically they'll give you either a dollar amount with some shares that are associated with it. So they'll say, like, at Meta, for example, they'll say, oh, we've given you an equity grant of $500,000. And that there's a certain amount of RSUs that you're getting with that is equivalent to that value, right? But at Amazon, they'll give you just a certain number of RSUs, and they'll kind of quote you a stock price that you should use to value them. At Amazon, they use the trailing 30-day stock price for the Amazon stock, and that's how they value it. So make sure to ask them what stock price they're using here. And typically, these equity grants vest over 4 years. Oftentimes, at some companies, it'll be different. I get Stripe, it only vests over 1 year. Some places it vests over 3. Just make sure to double check and ask the vesting schedule too, in terms of like, what's the percentage each year? Because that's typically what differs the most. You look at Amazon, they backload their equity vesting. So you only get 5% year 1, 15% year 2, but then you get 40% years 3 and 4. While at Google, it's the opposite. They front load it. Right. And oftentimes they'll have a cliff as well, which is where you basically won't start getting your equity grant until, a year, 6 months, however long it is, after you've started. Now, private equity grants, this is complicated, right? And recruiters want to use that complication to their advantage. They want to try to oversell the value of these options to you, because essentially stock options are the Schrodinger's cat of equity, right? They're both valueless and highly valuable at the same time until they go IPO, right? So at the end of the day, my personal recommendation when you're negotiating with private companies, you want to secure your cash because you're not going to get that equity for a while. But the best way for you to understand how you even can value those stock options, you really want to know 3 key things. What's the preferred price or share price of these options? What's the strike price of these options? And how many options are they offering you? So just to kind of run it down, and I know this is a lot of jargon, so would definitely recommend, do your own digging into this. I think there's some great blog posts out there. We can kind of go through some of those more in the Q&A. But to find the preferred price, that's basically the price that investors pay to exercise, aka buy back their options once the company IPOs. That number tends to be a bit higher, and it's usually set at the most recent 409A valuation. Now, the strike price, that is something that is the amount that you would pay to exercise these options as an employee. So typically the strike price, they try to make it lower so you're not having to pay a huge amount when the company IPOs. And the preferred price typically is higher because investors have a little bit more risk when they exercise the options. So basically the calculation that I do is let's subtract that low strike price number from the high preferred price number. That'll give you a more accurate share value as of today, then multiply that by the number of options, right? Obviously, this isn't 100% guaranteed to be what the value of your options actually is, but it gives you something more concrete to point to, as opposed to your recruiter telling you, oh yeah, these 50 options are worth $1 million, right? Let's get the actual context on this. And a lot of times recruiters will be reluctant to share this information. If it's a small company, I'd highly recommend talking to someone a bit higher up, someone in their finance department, maybe, CEO, CFO. They typically will be more genuine about the value of the options. Also talk to your hiring manager, right? They'll be a little bit more genuine as well, as opposed to the recruiter. And we need to understand when the preferred price and the strike price were most recently set. Because like I said, the preferred price is set at every 409A valuation. And there's this great resource online called Crunchbase. Would highly recommend using that if you're looking at a startup. You can search any startup name on Crunchbase and it will tell you when the last funding round was, how much they've raised so far. And you can typically see, if the preferred price, oh, that was set last month. Okay, that's pretty up to date. Oh, actually the preferred price was set in December of last year. Okay, this is not as up to date. Then you want to make sure you're asking your manager or whomever, what's an accurate multiplier that I could add on to that? What would that preferred price most realistically look like today? And again, we have a blog post on our website about private equity. Would highly recommend looking into that. Carta also has some really good blog posts about it online, CARTA. Would really recommend looking into them as well. Now, I talked about early stage startups. Now, late stage startups, this is where it gets a little bit more confusing because TikTok, Snowflake, and Airtable, these are all unicorn startups that have done very well, but they don't offer stock options. They offer actual RSUs. And this is because these are late stage companies. So, at this point, their share price is a lot more clear than it is for early stage startups that maybe aren't as publicly known about. Now, ultimately, it's kind of a toss up because, with TikTok, you're going to be getting more cash up front because you're getting, actual cash on your equity grant. But it's not going to be as long-term lucrative because when the company IPOs, it won't have as much impact on you as if you were getting stock options. Now, another aspect to equity, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, are refreshers. And refreshers are basically performance-based equity grants that you can get at your yearly performance evaluations. And usually it's a percentage of your original equity grant, like typically like 25%. And it vests separately from your original grant. So let's say you have, you join Meta, they give you a 100K equity grant that vests over 4 years. And that you're going to get 25% of that equity grant as your refresher. That kicks in year 2. So year 2, you do your performance evaluation. You get that 25K refresher. And basically that will vest from years 2 to 5, not years 1 to 4. So theoretically, by the time that 100K equity grant is gone, you have, the refreshers accrued from years 2, 3, 4, 5 to kind of get you to that 100K amount again and keep you at that consistently, even while the original grant is gone. Sometimes it'll have a multiplier based on your performance. At Meta, they definitely do that. So always ask, what's the multiplier look like depending on what performance grade you were given. And the idea is that once your original equity grant, runs out, you've got that, enough refreshers to keep your comp consistent, if not growing. I mean, like at Apple, they have the best refreshers in any company, and you can really see a lot of strong growth on your equity because of that. Now, a lot of times you'll maybe try to do your due diligence, to do your research, to find out, okay, what does this company pay? What's the deal with this company? And the dreaded thing happens. You type it into Google, you type it into all your resources, nothing comes up. What do you do in that situation? This is actually more often than not what we see. If you're not looking at a software engineer at a FANG company, it's going to be an uphill battle. And, even if you're looking at a FANG company, but you've got just a more niche job title, like commercial counsel, like visual artist, don't expect to be able to find the compensation details, right? Now, obviously, do your due diligence, look on places like Glassdoor versus Levels.fyi versus Team Blind, take with a grain of salt that Glassdoor really doesn't have that accurate of information, especially because they don't have the offers broken down. Levels.fyi, their main issue is that the compensation structures at these companies can vary quite a bit. Like at Amazon, you have offer structure, which is base salary, equity, and signing bonuses for years 1 and 2. Levels.fyi doesn't really have that sort of level of detail about what those signing bonuses look like. So you basically can only really get an accurate base salary from them. And Team Blind is the best place to get offer breakdowns. But, to always make sure you're looking at the date on whenever those were posted, because at this point with the market the way it is, if the offer is dated from this summer or earlier, it's going to be out of date. It's going to be stale. But you need to find data points that are at least from September, October, because a lot of these companies have changed their comp since then. But if the dreaded happens and you are unable to find any data points, the best course of action, and I mean, this is the best course of action, even if you do have a lot of data points, push the company to share the first offer and then add a reasonable percentage onto that when you do your counter offer. Now, by reasonable percentage, it really is dependent upon the company that you're talking to and the leverage that you have. If you feel like you're not really sure how much your manager likes you, you kind of have more like vague leverage, maybe you're in consideration for another company, maybe ask for a 20% increase on the yearly compensation. And then if it's larger and you feel like your hiring manager really, really likes you, they've been like, please join tomorrow, super excited to have you, then I'd say add 30% onto that yearly compensation and ask for it. And think about, if you have a firm number in mind, add at least 25K on top of that, right? Because the company will never match what you ask for. If you go in and in your heart of hearts that 350K comp is what you need to survive, if you ask for 350K, best they're going to do is 325, right? So you got to ask for 375, and then ideally they'll come back with 350, right? So do I need data points or not? I know I've been kind of going back and forth about the importance or the necessity of it, but ultimately this is called the art of negotiation, not the science of negotiation, right? Because at the end of the day, you can have all the data points in the world, go in, make a bad ask, and you can still not get the increase you're looking for, because ultimately negotiation skill is way more important than market data, right? And think about, you've got all of these opportunities for leverage. You've got potentially a promotion at your current workplace. You've got potentially another company that looks like a great opportunity. You've got an annual bonus that you're walking away from at your current workplace. There's no need to just reveal all of that to your recruiter at once, right? If you do so, it might make your second and third asks weaker, right? So try, focus on using the promotion first. Then if that doesn't work, well, I am walking away from an annual bonus, so I need at least a 30K signing bonus to cover that, and if that doesn't work, well, I do have an offer from TikTok. So based on that, I need at least this, right? Use those cards in the smart way, right? Not use them all at once. So I know I talked about negotiation skill. What even defines that, right? And we talked about this earlier when I was talking about the fear of being greedy. And I think it's because a lot of times, especially women, we don't want to confront people. We want to go along to get along. We don't want to make waves. And this is not a confrontational experience. This is a collaborative experience, right? At the end of the day, your recruiter is just the messenger. They don't decide what compensation you're getting. They don't decide if you get the job. They don't even decide if they can pull the offer, right? And, the best way for you to think about it is you and the recruiter versus the problem, not you versus the recruiter. Just like in a marriage, right? It's you and your partner versus the problem, right? If it becomes you versus your partner, it's not going to be productive, right? You're not going to get any traction there. And yes, as irritating as it is, the recruiter has no power, right? So why are you even negotiating with this person? And the recruiter, they actually play a very interesting role. They kind of wear a few different hats because they're sort of the advocate for you, but they're also the advocate for the hiring manager and for the compensation team in the company, right? They're selling you on the company, but they're also selling the company on you, right? So, the best way to really use this recruiter to your advantage is to build a genuine connection with them. Really sit down and have these conversations with them about, don't be afraid to kind of tell them a little bit more about, it's been a little bit stressful, got into a car accident. Oh, it's been really good. I just had a baby, whatever. Don't be afraid to kind of be a little bit more vulnerable, have that connection with them. Because at the end of the day, these recruiters are sort of like the TSA agents of the tech world, right? Nobody is nice to them right now. They're having to give a ton of bad news. They're having to lay people off. They're having to turn people away for hiring freezes. They're having to give out mediocre compensation and can't increase on it. So if you show them even the slightest bit of kindness, that's more than the average person does. So the kinder you are to them, the more willing they're going to be to work with you on this, right? And I know it can be hard because sometimes these recruiters can use a really intense tone of voice. They can come in being really rude and aggressive. And what I tell my clients is kill them with kindness. If you respond back with a tone of voice that's friendly, not defensive, but not apologetic either, you haven't done anything wrong, right? But if you respond back to that tone of voice with kindness, that is sort of just like a brick wall for that recruiter to bounce that energy off of. I'm a huge proponent of when you're angry or upset, when you try to take that out on someone else, that's you trying to make yourself feel better by giving away your emotion, right? So if you just politely decline to accept that emotion from your recruiter, that just kind of bounces that energy back to them. And then later on, they're like, wow, maybe I was a bit rude to them earlier today, right? So if you just keep that friendly kindness going, that should really be enough to that's kind of like your true north as you guide yourself through this storm here. Now, we were talking about recruiters don't really have that much power, and the hiring manager is the best person on the inside to really help you get those increases. Why not just go directly to them? Right? And, in some cases at small companies, you might, and especially if you're higher up, there's a chance that you might be doing more of the negotiation directly with the HM. But ultimately, hiring managers are very busy people that have a lot of stressful things to mitigate. And I think for a lot of them, they feel like negotiating compensation is below their pay grade. That's the recruiter's job, right? So they don't really feel like they want to be that. They also don't want to be the bad guy. That's, again, why there's a recruiter job, right? But it's still worthwhile for you, even if you don't bring up compensation proactively with the hiring manager, to try to get more face time with them, especially before you accept the offer, because you want to build a strong rapport there. You want to demonstrate that you're bringing in a lot of value. And one thing that really does that is the impact roadmap conversation. So that's a conversation I'd recommend having maybe after you've gotten your first offer, maybe even before, but basically at a point where you have a really strong understanding of what the scope of this role is. Because the impact roadmap is basically a time for you to sit down and think through, okay, the hiring manager told me that the main problems the teams were experiencing is this, and they said that they've tried these attempts with lack of success. What can I think about in my time, prior to this? How can I come up with potential solutions? Put those solutions together and think about your 30, 60, 90-day goals for implementing those solutions. Write that all out, and then go approach the hiring manager and share with them, and not bring any compensation ask or leveling ask. This is free of strings attached, right? You go to the hiring manager and you say, look, I noticed that you guys are having this problem. I'm thinking that we can maybe institute this, problem solving mechanic. 30 days, we could try this. 60 days, we could try that. 90 days, we could try that, right? And just really trying to appeal to the hiring manager of like, you have a strong understanding of what the issues are that they're trying to mitigate. You have a strong understanding of what the scope of the role is going to be. And even if you're not 100% right on what your potential solutions are, at the very least, you're demonstrating that you're thinking ahead and you're going to try to join this company and give as much immediate value as you possibly can. Right? Because then from the hiring manager's perspective, it gives them additional justification for why you need higher comp, because you're going to bring such a value add when you begin. Right? And usually with hiring managers, with the impact roadmap conversation, worst case scenario, they walk away feeling neutral. And again, that kind of goes back to how passionate is your hiring manager about you as a hire. Best case scenario, they're super pumped. They walk away feeling like they've made a right choice in extending you an offer, right? And we've talked a lot about, how can we make this less confrontational? How can we approach this collaboratively, right? And kind of going back to what I was saying about we were talking about the greed factor. We want to think of the ask as more of outlining your situation than a demand, right? I just want to be fully transparent. I've had some interviews with Meta. We did discuss a yearly comp of 600K. And look, I know Amazon and Meta do comp differently, but would you be able to go back to the team and see what could be doable given my situation, right? That sounds a lot better than, I'm going to need 600K. Right? You're being more voluntary in your sharing of that information. You're being very upfront and you're approaching it of, could we see what could be doable? Not, I need you to match this. I need it to be this, right? Another great tactic, and this is one that I struggle with because if you can't tell, I like to talk. And this is the sound of silence, right? When you're having these intense conversations, leaning into silence is often the best choice that you can make, because we were talking about how information is the currency here. And what's the best way to stop information coming out of your mouth is by not talking, right? And it gives you time to really think through what you want to say next. And in my opinion, if you're really not sure in that moment, I'd much rather, sit in silence for 5 seconds and take a deep breath and think through what I want to say versus jumping to say, well, I got, and you never know what's going to come out of your mouth in that moment. Right. And recruiters, they hate awkward silences. They love the sound of their own voice. They will fill that awkward silence theoretically with a lot of information too that could be valuable to you. Right. And whoever speaks the least in a negotiation typically tends to win. So just think about, if your leverage is more vague, or just in general with your leverage, say a sentence, that's short and vague, and, give them an inch worth of information. The recruiter can run a mile with it, right? Again, I'm in consideration. That's an inch worth of information that the recruiter can really go to any interpretation with, right? So think of your leverage opportunity as this 3D cube. And I know that this is not actually a three-dimensional cube because it doesn't have the lines in the back, but still, because there's multiple angles that you can portray to the recruiter, right? So let's say that you're talking to Meta and you've got a TikTok offer in hand, but the TikTok offer is for a lower level and it's also for a lot lower compensation. So the way that you can portray this to the recruiter is, I have an exciting offer from TikTok. It's not been finalized yet, but I expect that we could get to this. Or you could say, I got a TikTok offer. It's only 200K and it's at an entry level. Which side is the most flattering, right? So just try to show it in really the best possible perspective for your situation, right? Again, kind of going back to that narrative of like, I'm in consideration, that they could have easily said, I've applied to this, but that's not as strong, right? As I'm in consideration. So really think through what's the best phrase that you can use here to give that recruiter that inch worth of info, right? And I've said this a few times now, give that recruiter a crumb, they'll make a meal of it, right? Now, we've talked now a fair bit about what the conversation might look like, the ins and outs of it, but how do we even approach this? Can we do this over a phone call? Can we do this over an email? Now, I will say, in general, typically negotiations aren't happening in person. That obviously depends upon the career path that you're on, but we're mostly seeing these virtually done. Now, if it's over a phone call, typically I guide folks, especially for doing their first counter offer, to do the counter over a phone call first, because it just is more received positively. It's got the highest probability of success. You can really control the way that your tone of voice is sounding, and you can't be ignored. Right? They have to hear out your ask and give you responses to it. Now, the downside of phone calls obviously is performance anxiety. A lot of people are scared to jump on those calls and have those conversations. They don't want to say the wrong thing. And a lot of these recruiters and hiring managers are flaky. They will be challenging to pin down. They might be slow to respond to emails. It can be kind of frustrating to pin them down and get on a call with them, right? But emails, you don't have to worry about saying the wrong thing. You don't have to worry about scheduling. And theoretically, you can type up an email and send it pretty quickly. You don't have to do the same level of preparation as you would for a phone call. But the downside is, I've seen this happen a lot, where recruiters will just not see the email, or not see the email, right? It can be ignored here. And the other thing too is that, considering how long we've had the internet and text communication, it's amazing that we still really can't convey our tone of voice through it yet. And, you really want to make sure the recruiter's interpreting it in the best faith interpretation, right? If you're typing something like, oh, I'm really excited about TikTok, but how can I accept this offer when Facebook's valuing me higher? There's no guarantee that the recruiter won't say, yeah, I'm excited about TikTok, but Facebook's valuing me way higher. Right. And we don't want them to interpret it in that bad faith way. Right. And worst thing is that if you're really scared of jumping on a phone call and you send this email hoping that it won't lead to a phone call, you better believe these recruiters are going to call you like 5 minutes later. So maybe just prepare to do the first ask over a phone call. And then I think follow-up asks from there can be done over emails. I think it can be received more positively at that juncture, but typically doing the first ask over a phone call, I know it's scary, but I think it has the highest probability of success. And a lot of people, they don't want the negotiation to take that long, because ultimately you've done all these interviews, you're doing a full-time job likely, you probably got a life and a family outside of this. It's exhausting, right? And you might just be like, oh, let's just wrap this up quickly. But ultimately, it's actually more financially advantageous for you to make the negotiation last longer, right? The longer the negotiation goes, typically the better it is financially for you. But the 3 things that I would keep in mind are these 3 numbers. What's your walk away point number? This is the lowest number that you and your family could financially afford to accept. What's your target number? What's sort of like not pie in the sky, but more realistic? What's, it would be nice to give you a little bit of extra padding, but you're still not a millionaire yet. And then aspiration, what is that pie in the sky number? What would make you sign the offer letter immediately, right? And, it is hard to find a balance, because you don't want to alienate the company by making this negotiation take too long. But these companies will try to make you make a decision in like 24 hours sometimes. That is not a realistic time frame to make a life-changing decision, right? So the more educated that you are about what you'd really accept and what you really would not accept, that will really help bring clarity in these tough decision-making moments. And as scary as it sounds, especially maybe if you're in between jobs, sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away. It's really important that you sit and think through, what would your life and financial situation be like if you didn't have this option on the table? Are you going to be in a financial tough spot? Are you going to be able to pay your rent? Will your kids be able to afford their private school, right? Do you have another job to go back to in case things fall through? If yes, how awful is that job to work at, right? How long can you realistically stay at that job before you go crazy, right? And, at the end of the day, walking away can really lead you to an opportunity that could be a better fit and could value you considerably higher. Now, in terms of tactics that we should expect, we've kind of talked through a little bit of them. Expect them to give you tight timelines, haggling on the call, overselling the value of your offer, trying to use guilt-inducing verbiage. Oh, this is the best and final, et cetera, et cetera. Tight timelines. This is one I see all the time. This is where they say, oh, we really need you. We've had an urgent need on this team, so we need you to make this decision in 24, 48 hours, right? Now, the only real justification behind a timeline is if there's another candidate waiting in the wings. And a lot of times the manager or the recruiter will just tell you, like, hey, we do have so-and-so waiting in the wings here, and if you can't make a decision on this, we will have to move to them, right? And ultimately, the hiring manager decides the timeline. So we definitely can and should push for timeline extensions, especially if they give you a short timeline, because at the end of the day, it takes more than 24 hours to make this life-changing choice. And the verbiage that we'd use is really focusing upon, I want to make an educated decision in this case. And I'm really excited about you guys and the team, because at the end of the day, they want that reassurance that you're excited, right? They want to know that it's valuable to them to invest this time in you. So you saying, look, I'm really excited. I just feel I owe it to myself to make an educated decision. Would it be okay till I have till X date? Now, if they haggle on the call, your recruiter, you might call out a number to them and they might try to nudge you towards a different number. So, let's say you ask for 200K yearly comp. The recruiter says something like, oh, 200K, that's crazy high. But 160? Would you take 160? If I go and get that approved, it's going to be a huge uphill battle. So I'd need to know that you'd sign. And my guidance to you, unless 160K is your pie in the sky number, hold firm on that 200K. Look, I really appreciate you advocating for me on this. Ultimately, it's still going to be a tough decision given the gap in comp. If you could ask if the team, if 200K is possible, I'd greatly appreciate it. And I'd be ready to sign today. Right? So just holding firm on it and just emphasizing, if you could ask the team, not can you match, can you just see if it's possible? I'd really appreciate it. And, again, kind of going back to the equity stuff, recruiters love to oversell the value of the offer. Oh, you're close to 200K when you factor in the equity refreshers, when you're, factoring in the annual raises that you might get. And look, we can sit here and talk about what you could make 3-4 years from now till the cows come home, right? But we have an offer that you want me to sign today. I need to look at the numbers on the page today, right? So think about too, your leverage opportunity. They probably have annual bonuses. They probably have equity refreshers. So, make sure to emphasize to your recruiter, look, I need to look at these apples to apples, right? So if we're looking at refreshers, there's still a gap, right? If we're looking at annual raises, there's still a gap here. What can we do to close that? Best and final. Oh my gosh. If I had a nickel for every time I heard best and final, I would be a millionaire. Best and final. This is just a lie. I think if I had every client back down when we heard best and final, no one would ever get increases. Right. And just to tell you from my own personal experience, when I was negotiating my compensation, I was told, oh, there's nothing that we're going to be able to do on this. And then I said, oh, okay. Well, I did just want to let you know I was interviewing for this other company. And it sounds like they're going to be willing to do this. Well, let me see what we can do. So best and final, I don't think so. Right. So just don't be scared off by that verbiage. Guilt-inducing verbiage. Oh my gosh. This is one that can really frustrate, I think, a lot of people, just hearing things like, oh, I guess you're just not passionate about our mission if you really are focused on compensation. And, we want to set you up for success. So we want to set you with the right level of expectations, with the right level of comp, and we'll take care of you once you come in and provide, improve yourself. And, just think through this verbiage. A lot of times it can be scary. Things like, since we can't match your ask, should we end the process? That can be really scary to hear, right? But again, meet this with kindness, kill them with kindness, and think about, too, the excitement sandwich. I love the excitement sandwich. So this is kind of based on the leadership, philosophy of the compliment sandwich, where you give piece of negative feedback or piece of positive feedback, piece of negative feedback, piece of positive feedback. But with an excitement sandwich, I'd say do it more of like express your excitement for the opportunity, explain your reservation of why you're not signing yet, then express your excitement again. So look, I'm so excited about the possibility of joining TikTok. But the thing I'm struggling with is how could I accept the offer given the gap with Airtable? If you were able to go back to the team and close the gap further, I'd be ready to sign today. Right? So just kind of enclosing your reservation with excitement, because ultimately at the end of the day, the recruiter's not going to want to do this legwork if you're not motivated to sign. Now, here's the fear. Is there a chance my offer could be rescinded? Yes, but the probability is very low, very low. In my personal experience, I've never had a client lose an offer. Yes, even in this economy, I've never had a client lose an offer. And I think a lot of times, especially with women, I see that fear really dominating and, not wanting to risk that, right? And I would say you got to think about, these companies are investing so much time and money to get you to this point. They do not want to waste that by just, pulling this offer. Also think about, the recruiter doesn't have the authority to pull the offer. That's up to the hiring manager. So if you make an ask that's like a 20% increase or whatever on your yearly compensation, you have the right justification, you made it politely. If the recruiter goes to the manager and makes a claim of like, this person needs to get their offer pulled, again, that's not really justification enough. The easiest way to get an offer pulled is to ask for something incredibly high with no reasoning, or to say something offensive. Probably both would really solidify you losing the offer. And if you're really concerned, understand your leverage before you negotiate. Are there other candidates that the company is also at offer stage with? How do you match up with them? Do you know what the headcount is this year? How much does your hiring manager like you? How much buy-in do you have from the skip level manager, etc.? And in the very, very rare instance that this occurs, it's very possible to revive the offer, right? And I'll say this, a lot of times when they do rescind offers, the recruiter will reach out to you, or the hiring manager will reach out to you warning you, hey, we're thinking of pulling the offer. So you'll get heads up. They shouldn't pull the rug out from under you, right? And again, ask yourself these questions. If you've made this ask respectfully and you've asked for a small increase and your manager still decides to pull the offer, is this really the best fit for you? Does it sound like this company is really valuing you? Now, I know we're getting close on time, and I know I'll talk everybody's ear off. So just top 5 takeaways that I want to leave you with today. Number 1, get yourself to take the shot. I know it's scary, but as Wayne Gretzky says, you miss 100% of the shots you never take, right? And as long as you ask respectfully and for a reasonable amount, worst case scenario, they just say no. Or best, even in that scenario, maybe they reveal themselves to be a not great workplace, right? It helps kind of give you that context that you need. Takeaway 2, set yourself up for success. Focus on interviewing with multiple similarly focused companies. Line up that timeline, ideally, so you're getting offers around the same time, so you can create a bidding war for yourself, right? And try to dive into that leverage. How much does the hiring manager really like me? Do they have other candidates that they've mentioned waiting in the wings, right? Demonstrate value. Again, use that impact roadmap to your advantage. Make sure to understand the scope of your role before you dive into that impact roadmap, right? Have those conversations with your manager. And depending on their reaction, it could really inform how much the manager likes you, right? So it's just worthwhile to try that impact roadmap, right? Framing leverage. Again, the less info you share about your opportunity, the better, right? Give them that crumb of information. Recruiters can make a meal out of it. Always, if you don't have another offer in hand, but you've done an interview or 2 elsewhere, you can always say you're expecting something, right? That's pretty fair. And, let the recruiter ask you the clarifying questions before you volunteer that information. If you've got a promotion opportunity, you don't need to go down the rabbit hole about what your scope or what your role will look like then without the recruiter asking, right? Just let them ask. Who's the biggest enemy in the negotiation? It's ourselves, right? Don't let that inner anxiety voice, that inner critic tell you you can't do it, because you can. I've seen clients walk away from hundreds and thousands of dollars on the table. They've allowed recruiters to pressure them with timelines with just a minor increase. And it is very discouraging to see, especially women walk away from huge amounts of money on the table. So do the best that you can to know within yourself that the value you bring is high enough to be deserving of what you're asking for. Don't let that inner critic tell you no. All right. So I know I don't want to go into infinity mode. I know that I've kind of just chatted with you guys for a bit. But now I'd love to take some questions if you guys have any. So I'll go over to the questions tab.
Hey, I'm here to help you read some of them out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I was taking my own notes and I actually was having like, not mirages, but like past memories of like having to negotiate. And like the first time that I negotiated, and my mentor was like, you need to be willing to walk away. If you're going to do this, you need to be willing to walk away. And it was like the scariest thing. But ever since, like, I negotiate all the time. I feel like I do it weekly now, like especially with business things.
Heck yeah, I love it.
So thank you so much for this presentation.
Yeah.
So a question I have here is, great presentation so far. Facts. Thank you for sharing your expertise, Annie. Can we talk a bit about negotiating both compensation and work terms, like hour, flexibility, time off? At what stage in the hiring process do you bring up the latter?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that kind of comes down to, I would say even before the offer is extended or maybe around that time, really have these hard question conversations with your manager. Realistically, what amount of hours does the team expect me to work? And just know, to a certain extent, some of that is not going to be as negotiable as you think it is. Like, I have a client right now who's being told, oh, you're definitely going to be working on some weekends. You're definitely going to be working 60-hour weeks. She got texted on Thanksgiving asking to jump on calls. So if that's a deal breaker for you, you can try to push back on it, but ultimately it might just mean you need to walk away. Right? Things like benefits, at Amazon, you can definitely try to push back to get more than 3 weeks of PTO. Good luck. But ultimately, if it's a small company, I think there's a bit more flexibility on those benefits and our flexibility. But I think the bigger the company, the more reluctant they are to kind of negotiate that. One other thing I'll warn you about is companies that have unlimited PTO. What a desirable thing that is. But a lot of those companies, the internal culture is, oh, if you take more than 2 weeks, we don't love that. Right? So it's like, oh, it's not unlimited. Actually, it's 2 weeks of PTO. Okay. So just make sure you're kind of getting that clarity beforehand. And ultimately, especially with work-life balance, some amount of it is just you setting your own boundaries. I'll be online from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. After that, I'll see you later. Not responding to messages, turning on your do not disturb, whatever it needs to be, right?
Yeah, definitely. I just got like the Slack notifications. Like, the second question I have is, how do you calculate your walkaway and target numbers?
Yeah, great question. So things I would recommend there are look at your, what you've made last year and like think realistically about how comfortable you were with that salary. Right? And then if you have a rough estimate of what this company could potentially pay, then I think try to, compare that with what you're comfortable making right now. And then from there, if you're comfortable with what you're making, that can be like your baseline. You'd accept it and you can afford it, but it wouldn't be great. Right? And then from there, think about, what are your financial goals? Do you have the desire to buy a car? Do you have children? Do you want to get married, et cetera? What big life expenses are you expecting to have to deal with, right? And try to calculate that and then think about, okay, so it looks like I'm going to have a couple of major expenses this next year. So realistically, if I was to be comfortable, and maybe add like another like 25, 50K on top of that, just to give you some breathing room, that could be more your middle number. And then your happy number, that could be $1 million, right? That could be, whatever your long-term career, like for me personally, I had a goal to make 100K before I was 30. So every time I would, apply to a new job, I would always think about, okay, how much closer am I to getting that? And that was always my pie in the sky number, right? Yeah.
For individual contributors, because we may have some people in the audience that like don't want to take a management route or anything, how should they think about maybe like caps within bands or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So It kind of depends on where your level is at. I'd say leveling placement is a huge factor when it comes to ICs, because that can be the difference of like 100K yearly comp if you're like at a senior data scientist versus staff data scientist. That can be a drastic increase. And I think that typically when you're looking at salary bands, there's usually about that 100K of yearly comp wiggle room. And again, if you have a solid understanding of what the pay band is and you're seeing yourself coming in at that bottom of band, even though you're an IC and you might not have desires to move into management, think about how you can leverage your prior experience to try to justify why you need top of band, right? Mm-hmm. And think about really leveraging the scope of what you've done too, in terms of, the projects that you've taken on, both independently from your company and with your company, right? And how you've demonstrated that you bring that high value add in, because it can be easy or not easy, but it can help you to kind of frame yourself as like, oh, so it sounds like I'm like at the top of the staff band. Is that right? Especially if you're coming in like at a level that maybe is like equivalent from your previous level. If you're like L5 at Meta and you're looking at like an L5 at Google opportunity, you can always say, well, look, I was an L5 at Meta, and based on my responsibilities, I feel like I'm more at the top of the L5 band. And especially if you try to push for an up level, I think that can also give you additional justification for why you really need that strong comp.
Mm-hmm. So by the way, everyone, the question section is on the right-hand side. Beneath the chat bubble, it has a question mark. You're able to ask questions anonymously because we're talking about money, and I want to make sure that you ask all your questions. So you can look over there if you wanted to add any. I do have another one. How would the processes mentioned be adapted if it was an internal negotiation within a current role?
That is a great question. So internal negotiations are tougher, I think, for coaches to kind of consult on, because there's a lot of context that we don't have. Like, really look back at your previous performance evaluation results and think about how you can leverage those, and, focus on what's your relationship with your manager. Do you have an open, comfortable relationship where you can talk about money? And I think a lot of the time too, that impact roadmap conversation can happen while you're still at your current job. In fact, it has for me. Like, I've done impact roadmaps to kind of outline where I want to be within the next 6 months to a year, and demonstrated that. And that can just really show again to your boss that you're bringing a high value add. And oftentimes don't wait for that performance evaluation to have that conversation. And you can even, after you have that impact roadmap conversation later on, you can say, look, if I'm going to be transitioning to this, I would love to potentially talk about compensation as well. But, again, talk to your colleagues internally. They know what those pay bands are, because, especially if you have friends who are at the higher level, they will know what the promotion track kind of looks like. But just don't limit yourself to waiting for those performance evaluations, because oftentimes, you might shoot yourself in the foot and kind of miss that window.
Mm-hmm. What about like smaller companies where maybe they don't have
leveling structures?
Don't have the next role yet. Like, they're making it up as they go. Like, I know one of the companies I was working with, like, the data department was completely new. So I had nothing to go off of. Yeah. So my negotiations were very interesting, like the way I went about it. Yeah. What would you do if you have nobody else to ask, because like you are the person?
That's great. And I would say in that instance, think about, like, for me personally at Rora, we're a small company, and I'm thinking about, do I want to be a career advisor forever? Do I want to potentially move into a different position? Think about what that position entails. And, again, even if that position doesn't exist yet at the current company, outlining what you think that impact is. And then, obviously, I think look at other companies of a similar size, if you can, online, to try to find other data points. But just think about what that would mean for your compensation were you to kind of move into more of that senior role. But again, if you're proactively demonstrating, hey, I want to move into more of a management position, I want to move into more of a senior position here. Here's what I think a senior position looks like. Here's what my goals would be 30, 60, 90. What are your thoughts on this? Again, if you do this separate from the performance evaluations, and you bring it up proactively to your manager has like 84,000 things that they're stressing about. So you coming in and doing this additional work can be huge. And it also might mean, which kind of is tough at smaller companies, you taking on that work a little bit more proactively before you've even transitioned into that job. Like, trying to take on work of that senior position. So that way you're, again, demonstrating to your boss without them having to do a ton of legwork. Oh, I can see that Kishana is really demonstrating this senior staff, data science capability. right? And use that to your advantage. And then when it comes to compensation, I think, again, it's thinking about, okay, would my compensation structure drastically change? Am I moving from a sales role to more of a back end role? Or if I'm staying within data science, what do I think a fair increase is based on the additional work that I'm doing? Is that 20%? Is that 30%? Et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Sorry to keep you in the promotion space, but what do you do about promotions that come as a promotion but without the pay? Like the pay is delayed.
The pay is delayed. Oh
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah, I've
That's
seen
not
it. I've seen it where the promotions are going around and pay is delayed. Like they're saying, like, oh, like you
that
got,
is tough.
yeah.
It's tough when you're having to work a new job and you're getting paid for the old one. And I
Hmm.
think that's really the verbiage that I would use would be something like, I understand that there's delays on pay, but what I'm struggling with is how can I take on these new responsibilities if I'm not being compensated accordingly? You know?
You have the lines. I'm telling you,
A lot of it.
you need like a little book of Annie's lines.
Yeah, it's all these just like, again, really framing it in the way of, you're excited about the promotion opportunity. You're excited to dive into this work. But realistically, how could you do this if you're not getting compensated accordingly? Right?
Hmm.
How is the company showing up for you here? And if that means like, okay, the pay is going to be delayed till March of next year, great. I'll start taking on my action items in March.
Hmm.
You know? And like, I'm happy to stay on my current role.
Scenario.
It's scary though, right? I saw, this is a little bit unrelated, but I saw on TikTok someone was talking about trying to negotiate at a nonprofit and how scary that is. Oh, well, we're a big family here. We never increase, and this is more than I make, and blah blah blah. And it's like, don't let this guilt tripping verbiage, or oh, the times are really tough, so you're going to get a promo with no increase. Again, it's like, you bring a high value add here, so don't let them strong arm you with this "we're a big family here" nonsense.
Hmm. How well do negotiating titles work in like new offers, like the new offer space? Like if you
Yeah,
want to change a title or something like that, is that normally well accepted or?
that's a good question. So it depends on the size of the company. I think if you're looking at a bigger company, best case scenario is you push for an up level to basically get to that next level of like senior or staff or whatever. But I think that smaller companies, job titles, I mean, look, if you're looking at a startup, your job title can kind of be really whatever, and sometimes if you have like a cushy job title of like VP at this startup, don't expect to go to like Meta and them to match that level in placement, because they know those titles are inflated. So just think about that too. If you're doing it to, actually get the skill set of like, I really want to be a manager, focus on getting those hard skills of like, oh, I led this team of 20, etc. So that way it's more leverageable than you just getting kind of that stronger title when maybe those responsibilities aren't like folding in. But I think, especially when it comes to up level, approach it with the manager, focus on leveraging the scope of your current position. And if you have any positions at a higher level that you're being considered for, definitely leverage those as well. And again, managers might tell you, oh, we never increase levels at this stage. That's false. They do increase levels after giving offers. And they might also say, oh, you could get promoted within a year. Do you want to work at a company where you're working at a below scope of your current job for a year? Right? Think about those deal breakers. But managers definitely the best one to approach about it. But be careful about how much you push back. I'd say if your manager gives you like 2 or 3 rounds of pushback on that, probably back down. You don't want to damage the relationship.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know why the audience has me asking all the questions, but I'm going to ask them. So what about sign-on bonuses? Like when
Yeah.
do you ask for those?
Yeah, I say when they give you an offer, if the signing bonus isn't included, ask, so are there situations where signing bonuses can be included? And they might, if it's a small startup, they might say no. Or they might say, yeah, it's like capped at 5K or something like that. But if it's a bigger company, typically they will pay out a signing bonus, but they try to not include it on the first offer. And their justification for signing bonuses is more like, oh, if you have an annual bonus that you're walking away from, or like an equity vesting payout. Now, this can often be sort of a rabbit hole for recruiters to kind of push you down about what your current comp is. And they can kind of go into a lot of detail of like, oh, cool, what's your equity vesting schedule? Oh, cool, what's the stock price that they use? And like all this really personal detail. It's actually illegal for them to ask you, by the way. It's illegal for them to ask you for your current compensation information, at least in the state of Washington and California. Don't quote me on that for Canada. I need to double check. But yeah, it ultimately, sorry, just lost my train of thought there. Going back to talking about signing bonuses. In this case, I think asking them, like when you present your counter offer, a lot of times if you're looking at another company, you can just say, hey, what I'm expecting from Meta is X base, Y equity grant, Z annual bonus, A signing bonus, right? And that usually should be enough. But if you have an annual bonus or like equity payout that you're walking away from at your current company, that can be leveraged. But just know that at a lot of these companies, they'll only consider that if you're walking away from that bonus and it would be paid out within 3 months of you starting at this new company. Because if it's going to be later than that, they usually feel like, oh, well, it's not on Meta. You maybe wouldn't have gotten that by joining Meta, right? Or, that wasn't directly affected with us. So just be cognizant if you're getting that payout and it's maybe after 3 months, just think about how you can frame that. Sometimes like, it's going to be paid out in Q1. Not maybe the end of Q1, but it'll still be paid out in Q1, right? Just that kind of careful phrasing.
Mm-hmm. I know whenever I would have like phone screens or anything, like I would always, it was like a game for me to like make sure that I asked what the range for the role was before they could ask me. Like in which part of that conversation should you ask if there wasn't clarity on the job posting?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you can definitely ask the range.
Yeah, so you don't go like deep down in the process and then like you find out it wasn't close to anything you wanted.
Right. I mean, here's the thing. You can ask the range. There's no guarantee they're going to share it. In some states in the U.S., in California specifically, there is something called the California Equal Pay Act, where basically if you ask them what the range of the role is, they're obligated legally to share it with you. Does that mean that they do? Absolutely not. But they if you say, oh, I heard about the California Equal Pay Act, with that in mind, what's the range for this role? More often than not, they will share it, right? But I think you can definitely ask, especially it's a great way to kind of push back if they're like, oh, what are your comp expectations? That's a great question. I don't even know what the range of this role is. Can you share that with me? Oh, well, that gives me a lot to think about. Okay, well, let me get back to you after I've done some thinking. Right? It's as simple as that. Just kind of pushing back. A lot of times the easiest way to push back on asking comp expectations is just ignorance. Oh, I don't know. I'm just not sure what my market worth is yet. If you could put together an offer, that would really help. And again, putting that ask back on that recruiter. Don't just leave it. Oh, I don't know. That's not going to really go anywhere, right? Putting the ask back on the recruiter. Oh, but what's the range for this role? Oh, but if you could put together an offer, again, that will just kind of stop the line of questioning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like very important. Like I've had times where like I've had the phone screen and I'm glad, and also even like in business where I'm glad they put the number first because my number was actually significantly lower than at the bottom that they were talking about.
But even if it's a lot higher than you expect, I would always guide you to respond to that range. Never with like, wow, or anything. I would just be like, interesting. Yeah, I'll need to think about that.
Yeah, I've been on the phone because I've been like, interesting.
Yeah, I always recommend don't do negotiations over Zoom calls. Okay, they will send you a Zoom link. Dial into it on your smartphone. Oh, I'm having Wi-Fi issues. You do not need to be on a video call, right? Because if mitigating your tone of voice is hard enough, right? Let alone your facial expressions.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any more questions before I let Annie go? I mean, I don't see any questions, but I could talk to you all day.
I'm down. Well, it's been so lovely getting to speak with all of you. Again, I'm so passionate about helping women and, especially Black, Indigenous, other women of color get increases in their offers. Take these monies from these billionaires, put it back in your pocket. You guys deserve it, right? At the end of the day, don't let that inner critic tell you can't do it or that you shouldn't do it, right? Because you should and you deserve it.
Exactly. And where can the audience find you, Annie? Because
Yeah,
I'm sure they're gonna inundate you somewhere. They're gonna find you somewhere.
I am putting in the chat, not the question section, in the chat, my LinkedIn page. And my LinkedIn is also, I think, just on my little screen. If you hover over my name, it'll have Career Advisor Aurora LinkedIn. Click on that. Feel free to connect with me. I'm happy to jump on a free consultation call with any of y'all for 30 minutes. I'll talk about whatever. And, just don't hesitate to reach out, even if you just have questions. If you're not interested in engaging with the service, always happy to help.
2023, the year of the increase.
Yes, yes. And don't let the economy scare you off. There's still lots of money out there. We can still do this, okay?
All right, perfect. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day, and thank you, Annie, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a lovely day, everyone.